Hearing that, Jean Runcandle smiled and casually rested his sword over his shoulder. All right then, I'll go get both your portion and mine. At that moment, sunlight seemed to fall over Jean like a halo, making him look almost dazzling. So that's why my youngest son said that. Chiron Runcandle quietly listened to the report about Jean Runcandle's recent actions, and as the details reached him one by one, the meaning behind Jin's words finally began to settle into place. Yes, Patriarch. After giving that reply, Chiron Runcandle suddenly turned away and let out a low burst of laughter. I see. So the boy has finally made his choice, hasn't he? He intends to protect the weak while ruling through strength himself. If that is truly the path he has chosen, then let him continue walking it. His voice carried both curiosity and quiet approval. I want to see just how far he can go, Chiron Runcandle said. Then he gave a calm order. Go back and tell the boy everything. The one receiving that command bowed at once. Yes, my lord. With his head slightly lowered, Chiron Runcandle's stern face curved into a faint, dangerous smile. I will give the boy his very first mission. In January of 1795, at the age of 15, Jean Runcandle was officially recognized as a 3-star knight. During the first holiday break, some of the students returned to their hometowns, while the rest stayed behind and trained on their own to test how much they had improved. Once a cadet reached the intermediate level, wooden swords were no longer used for training. In their place came real blades, custom-made and properly forged for actual combat practice. Many cadets had already commissioned blacksmiths to forge personal swords that matched their own style. Jean Runcandle had also been planning to find a suitable blade in the clan's armory, but Luna Runcandle insisted that she would personally help him choose one. Finding a sword that truly suits you is never easy, Jean Runcandle thought, already sensing that this would not be a simple matter. Because Luna Runcandle had firmly declared that she wanted to choose a sword for him herself, all decision-making power had naturally ended up in her hands. Leaning against the wall, Jean Runcandle quietly recalled what had happened that day a month earlier, his expression turning a little complicated as the memory returned. At that time, Luna Runcandle had stubbornly insisted on keeping the right to choose the sword. Jean, please let me pick one for you. In the end, Jean had lowered his head and tried to reassure himself. Whatever. She has a much better eye for weapons than I do, so the sword she picks will probably suit me well enough. Then, cutting straight through those thoughts, Luna stepped out of the treasure room carrying an enormous sword in both hands. Jean Runcandle stared at it with his face frozen in disbelief, completely unable to hide how stunned he was by what he was seeing. Luna Runcandle looked at Jean with bright confidence and introduced it proudly. This sword is called the Slaughtering Veil. I used it a lot when I was around your age. It's big, it's sharp, and honestly, I thought something like this would suit you too. Then she lowered her eyes to the blade with open affection. I guess this is basically the original form of the great sword I used back then. She suddenly turned and asked, What do you think, Jean? Do you like this sword? It was such a difficult question that Jean felt all of his prepared words twist together inside his mouth before he answered hesitantly. Sister Luna, I'm really grateful that you chose something for me, but I don't think this sword suits me very well. The moment he said that, Luna's face visibly fell, because she had clearly put real effort into choosing a blade for her little brother. I see. It's fine. I was just joking anyway. Jean Runcandle looked at her expression and thought to himself, no, she absolutely was not joking. Luna Runcandle gave the sword a swing and muttered to herself, but the Slaughtering Veil really is a good sword. It's a little heavy, sure, but not unbearably so. Her eyes narrowed as she examined the blade with a serious, sharp gaze. Looking down at the oversized sword now resting on the ground, Luna let out a reluctant sigh and finally said, All right, I'll listen to you. I'll choose another one for you instead. Hearing that, Jean Runcandle quietly let out a long breath of relief and sighed. As she pushed open the treasury door again, Luna Runcandle said, You know, I really put a lot of thought and effort into choosing a sword for you. Then, without waiting for a reply, Luna Runcandle led Jean Runcandle back into the treasury once more. Holding a different sword now, she spoke in a sincere, steady voice. A sword that only you can truly use. This is the one I chose for you. The moment Jean Runcandle saw the sword Luna was holding up, he was genuinely surprised. She had chosen Bradamanti from the very beginning, just as if she had already known exactly what he needed. So I think this will be the most suitable sword for you, Luna Runcandle said. Jean watched as she slowly drew the blade from its sheath and thought to himself, this sword. It is the one linked to Barasada, the weapon used by the first patriarch, Bradamanti. Jean Runcandle took Bradamanti into his hands with obvious interest shining in his eyes. Luna looked at him and asked, almost teasingly, you like this sword now, don't you? Jean answered immediately, without the slightest pause. Yes, out of the thousands of excellent swords here, this one is truly the most special. Looking down at the blade resting in his hands, Jean Runcandle thought to himself, this is the sword I had already told myself I needed to obtain no matter what. I never expected Luna to choose Bradamanti for me herself. Both Bradamanti and Barasada were extremely well suited for using shadow energy. If Jean had tried to choose this sword on his own, the others would almost certainly have objected and forced him to give it up. That was why he felt deeply grateful to Luna Runcandle for placing it in his hands. This blade was one that many of his brothers and sisters had wanted, which only made him wonder even more how he could ever repay her for choosing it for him. Hearing that, Luna Runcandle gave him a slightly hurt look and replied, that doesn't sound right, Jean. I guess you still haven't fully let your guard down around me, have you? She lowered her face a little, and clear disappointment showed in her expression. I'm a little hurt, honestly. Jean Runcandle quickly waved his hands and denied it. No, it's not like that. I mean it sincerely, Jean said. Luna Runcandle stepped closer and pointed at him. Really? Then if that's true, soothe this poor, disappointed little heart of mine. Jean Runcandle was visibly flustered. What? Then Luna calmly told him to close his eyes. Jean, your training starts now. All right. Do you know what I mean? She asked. Of course, Sister Luna, Jean answered. Good. But today, there's also something else I need to teach you. Hearing that, Jean looked genuinely surprised. What? Luna Runcandle placed both hands on Jin's shoulders and spoke in a voice far more serious than before. Your family may constantly try to drag one another down, but they are also the people who can love you without conditions. Keep that truth in your heart, she said with quiet emphasis, making sure every word settled deep inside him. Then, all at once, Luna grabbed Jean by the shoulders and shouted, and don't be sad. Startled badly, Jean jumped and hurriedly replied, I understand, I understand. I'm sorry. After that burst of force, Luna lowered her voice into something more private and intimate. I've lived a lonely life within this family since before you were even born. I've had enough of living that way. So please understand. I don't want you to end up trapped in that same life too. Jean trembled slightly under the strength of the hand still gripping his arm and answered in a faint, shaken voice. I know, Luna. At once, Luna Runcandle brightened again and turned around cheerfully. All right then, Jean. Let's begin training now. Feel it with your whole heart. Not long after that, Jean Runcandle hurried back to his room to show off the sword. Murakin, what do you think? Expecting praise, he was caught off guard when Murakin simply told him, take it back to the armory. You still can't properly handle shadow energy, so you can't use that sword yet. Hearing that blunt answer, Jean lowered his head and muttered in disappointment. Murakin continued, if you want to use Bradamanti, you need at least 3-star shadow power. But right now, you're just a 2-star brat. You can't reproduce the awakened form of that sword. Jean Runcandle looked down at the sword with a doubtful expression, but then quietly strengthened his resolve. I'll reach 3 stars soon enough. Then I'll be able to use it before long. The moment Murakin heard that, he snapped the book he had been reading shut and shouted in irritation. How arrogant. Listen carefully to what I'm saying. What's this nonsense? Barasada and Bradamanti are not weapons you can use carelessly just because you feel like it. You need at least 3-star shadow power just to meet the bare minimum. That is the absolute minimum, Murakin said as he smacked Jean roughly on the head. Until then, just use normal swords and wait until you've reached 5-star shadow power if you want to handle them properly. Got it, Jean Runcandle said as he struggled back upright. But then he pushed Murakin's hand away and smirked with a cheeky, shameless grin. You know I'm not the impatient type, old man. I just need to hit 5-star power this year, right? The moment Murakin heard that, veins bulged visibly across his forehead, his anger rising so fast, it was almost ridiculous. Grabbing Jean by the head, Murakin ground his teeth together and warned him, even if you ranked first in shadow power, mastering something like that is still complete madness. I'm telling you this for your own good. It's so absurd that even the sword itself would laugh in your face. If you understand me, then stop talking nonsense. While the old dragon kept scolding him without pause, Jean Runcandle quietly stretched out his hand and tried to sneak the book away while Murakin was still busy rambling. Jean Runcandle snatched up the book and raised it like he was about to rip it in half, his voice turning cold and sharp as he threatened. Hey, say that again. What exactly did you just say? The moment Murakin saw his favorite storybook in danger, he lunged forward in furious panic and cursed loudly. Damn it. Hey, put that down right now. Jin's tone stayed flat, but there was a clear warning in it when he repeated, put it down. At that exact moment, Gilly McLaurin came rushing in from outside, calling out in a hurried voice. Young Master Jean. Hearing her, Jean turned around at once, his expression sharpening. Gilly, what is it? Did something happen? Taking advantage of the instant Jin's attention shifted away, Murakin quickly snatched his precious storybook back into his arms. Gilly reported without wasting a second. Instructor Garen is looking for you. He was going to come here himself, but he said he needs to keep checking the map while discussing the strategy summary with you, so he asked for you to go to him instead. Her tone was respectful, but there was enough urgency in it to make clear this was not a casual summons. Murakin dropped to the floor and clutched the recovered book tightly to his chest, nearly in tears from relief as he muttered, Oh, my beloved comic. Meanwhile, Jean stopped paying attention to Murakin's little drama and focused on Gilly's words instead, quietly turning the situation over in his head. Strategy? Jean asked, and Gilly nodded with a serious face. Yes, Instructor Garen has been assigned to oversee your first mission. Once the break is over, you are expected to depart immediately. Jean turned away and scratched the back of his head as he started walking, sounding half thoughtful and half amused. I see. So the time has finally come. I'm a 3-star swordsman now, after all. Still, being sent out right after the break feels a little unusual. Gilly followed close behind Jean as they walked, keeping her pace just a step behind his. I think it may be because the mission is especially difficult, she said. Normally, intermediate-level tasks and above are reserved for more capable cadets. Jean gave a faint, confident smile and replied, Then it probably means they've recognized how much I've improved and decided I'm ready for it. Jean turned back for a moment and gestured casually, full of easy confidence. I'll go see what this is about, Gilly. You stay here and keep Murakin company. Gilly lowered her head slightly and answered in a soft voice. Yes, young master. Please go ahead. Her response was calm, but her eyes still carried quiet concern. When Jean arrived at the appointed place, he reached for the door without hesitation and pushed it open. The mood on the other side already felt heavier, as if the room itself had been waiting for him. As soon as he stepped inside, Jean spoke first. Garen, I heard I've been assigned a mission. Garen, who had been studying a strategic plan, turned around to face him and gave a formal greeting. Greetings, young master. In addition to you, 10 other cadets have also received assignments. You will be divided into 2 teams to carry out separate operations. The task is a search mission in the area near the southern border of the Den Empire. The Den Empire? Jean repeated as he looked toward the map. That's close to the Beastmen territories, isn't it? And if I'm reading this right, it's also not far from the area marked as the White Wolf Tribe's den. The moment he said it aloud, the location already felt more dangerous than a beginner's mission should have been. Hearing that, Jin's expression grew more serious. Low-level cadets should not have been sent anywhere near a place like this. For a first mission, the difficulty was clearly high, and on top of that, the operation period was shorter than normal. The whole assignment felt deliberate, as though someone had chosen these conditions for a reason. As Jean reached toward the table, Garen handed over the materials. Young master, here is the map, along with the detailed information on the team members. The papers were neatly prepared, but the weight of what they represented was far from simple. Give it here, Jean said, taking the documents and scanning through them. The more he read, the more surprised he became. Every member assigned to his team had only barely achieved pre-intermediate results, and there was even Bear Gaston, whose performance had always been unstable. Jin's eyes narrowed. Did someone deliberately propose this arrangement? The setup was too specific to feel random. A proposal? Jin muttered to himself. If news of his fight with Bellup Schmitz had reached his father, then this mission was likely more than just an assignment. It was probably a test, carefully arranged to measure what kind of resolve he truly had. As that thought settled in his mind, Jin slowly clenched his fists. All right, father, he said inwardly, his determination hardening. Then I'll prove it to you no matter what. I'll show you that my belief will never waver. Jin vowed silently, his gaze firm and unwavering. There was no hesitation left in him now, only the calm intensity of someone who had already decided to see things through to the end. 3 days later, at the southern border, Jin stood before the assembled group and laid out the objective. The purpose of this mission is to locate Simberville, the heir of the Xing kingdom. Once we arrive, we'll establish a guard camp at the center of the southern border. After the camp is secured and preparations are complete, each team will begin separate searches. Information will be shared by sending one person back to camp at a fixed time each day. His voice was steady, clear, and carried the weight of command. He looked over the group and added in a firmer tone, and one more thing. Don't call me young master while we're out here. Call me commander. After a brief pause, he continued, if anyone is injured, stay in camp and rest when necessary. Don't force yourselves past your limit. That's all. Then, in a lower voice, he finished with quiet tension. Let's just hope the scout leader is still alive. A little while later, Buber Gaston hurried over through the snow to report directly to Jin. His breathing was uneven from rushing, and the tension on his face made it obvious he had found something worth mentioning immediately. Commander, Edom reported seeing a beastman from the Watertail tribe, Buber said. Hearing that, Jin calmly reached up and pulled back his hood, revealing a more focused expression. The Watertail tribe, he repeated under his breath, already sorting through what that could mean. Since the Watertail tribe was known to be gentle and to avoid carnivorous tribes whenever possible, Jin judged the situation quickly. If that's really them, then we probably won't have to enter the White Wolf tribe's territory nearby, he said while picturing the local beastmen settlements in his mind. Even so, he did not let his guard down. Then Jin turned at once and gave a clear order. All right, Buber Gaston. The snow will slow you down, so leave 2 hours earlier than planned and return to Area 13. Buber straightened immediately, placed a hand over his chest, and accepted the order without hesitation. Understood, Commander, Buber answered. Jin then looked to the rest of the group and commanded, the rest of you will search Area 13. They all responded in one voice. Yes, Commander. After that, Jin stepped slightly aside and watched the beastmen from a distance, a faint unease creeping into his thoughts. Something about the mission still felt off. His father may well have arranged it directly, but everything had gone too smoothly so far. For a moment, Jin wondered if he had misunderstood the purpose of the test. With that uneasy feeling lingering in the back of his mind, Jin started walking toward the beastmen. His steps were measured and cautious, and though his face remained calm, every sense in him stayed alert. As Din's group approached, the beastmen gathered together warily, clustering in a loose group as they watched the humans come closer. One of them finally spoke up first, trying to address the others, while the rest looked tense, uncertain, and clearly not used to this kind of encounter. Then another beastman, clutching a fish in both hands, pointed at Jin and said in a pitiful voice that he looked miserable. The beastman carrying the fish slowly approached Jin, held the fish out toward him with trembling hands, and said, if you're sad, eat this. It's for you. Jin bent down to the creature's level and accepted the gesture with surprising warmth. Thank you, he said. I'll repay this kindness later. After that brief exchange, Jin continued observing the area and thinking things through. Beyond Area 13 lay Beastman territory in earnest, and if his assumptions were correct, low-level soldiers would stand no chance if a real conflict broke out there. The deeper he considered the terrain, the less he wanted to make a reckless move. Jin pulled out the strategic map once more and kept thinking in silence. There was no need to push himself just to produce flashy results. For the next 3 days, he decided he would focus on confirming which areas had actually been searched and on tightening control over the situation. Patience, not haste, would keep his people alive. Suddenly, an urgent shout tore through his thoughts. "Young master!" Buber Gaston came running from a distance, his face pale and full of panic. One look at him was enough to tell Jean that something had gone seriously wrong. "Young Master Jean!" Buber cried again. Jean turned around immediately, worry flashing across his face. "What is it, Buber?" But the panic in Buber's voice was already enough to make Jean go still before the full answer even came. For a brief, heavy moment, Jean stood completely motionless. The air around him seemed to tighten, as if everything had frozen just before bad news struck in full. The second team was ambushed, Buber finally reported. The instant he heard that, Jean spun around and raised his hand to issue orders. "All forces, prepare to move." "Buber, give me the details." Buber answered hurriedly. The team scattered to avoid the enemy and break pursuit. His words came fast, but the fear behind them was even clearer. "One of the survivors managed to reach the guard camp and report what happened," Buber added. Jean pressed further at once. "Was it the Beastmen? Did they ambush the team?" Buber's face twisted with panic as he shook his head. "No, it wasn't Beastmen. They were ambushed by humans. It has been confirmed that only 3 people attacked the run candles," Buber said, still sounding shaken. "Just 3. Jin's face hardened immediately. "Impossible. If they made a move like this, I'm sure there are more of them nearby." Then he turned and shouted in a commanding voice. "Eddington, David, return to camp and secure the perimeter. Do not engage the enemy under any circumstances," Jean continued while moving. "Your first priority is to report everything as deeply and accurately as possible." "Yes, sir," came the answer. Even while issuing orders on the run, Jin's thoughts kept turning. There were too many enemies in this region for this to be coincidence. But what was their actual objective? And why had they targeted Team 2 instead of Team 1? No matter how he looked at it, the situation was wrong. Jean did not know who the attackers were yet, but they had struck fast and clean. Suddenly, he stopped and raised a hand, signaling the 2 behind him to halt at once. They had reached a sign of battle. As his eyes sharpened, one cold thought settled in his mind. Whoever had touched the Runcandle family would pay for it. Then Buber Gaston suddenly spoke up in a strained voice. "Young master, there's blood beneath the snow." Sure enough, half hidden under the white surface were footprints and dark red stains, stark and ugly against the frozen ground. Buber's face went pale as he stammered. "No way. Mesa Milcano. Team 2, they can't all be dead." Jin's voice cut through his panic in a calm, steady tone. "Calm down, Buber. The blood is still fresh." His composure steadied the air, even if the sight before them was grim. Jean carefully knelt down and examined the tracks in detail. There were no signs of bodies collapsing here, and no signs of dismemberment either. "There was a fight," he said quietly, piecing it together. Then Team 2 fled. His eyes moved across the snow again, and judging by the footprints, only one person carried out the ambush at this point. Sierra's voice called out from nearby. "Young master, we found an abandoned bandage. It looks like it belongs to Huel Hister." Her report came quickly, but there was clear urgency in it, as if she understood this small item might become the key to tracing the team's path. Jean looked at the blood-stained white bandage in Sierra's hand and gave a short nod of approval. "Well done, Sierra. Where exactly did you find it?" Even in the middle of tension, he did not miss the importance of careful reporting. "In the west," Sierra answered. Jean took the bandage and studied it closely while reconstructing the route in his mind over the strategic map. "So they treated the wounded while retreating," he murmured. Then they were pressured again by the ambusher and pushed westward. The trail was beginning to form, piece by piece. Jean straightened up at once and issued another order without delay. "Sierra, regroup with Arlington and stay close to him. Rely on his support and do not break formation." Then he looked ahead and said, "Let's move." When Buber Gaston hesitated for even a moment, Jin's voice turned firmer. "Buber Gaston, obey the order." "Yes, young master," came the immediate reply. Jean and Buber Gaston continued moving through the snow, pressing deeper into the area. After they reached a stable hiding spot and lowered themselves into cover, Buber whispered tensely, "It's Team 2, young master." His voice was low, but the fear in it was impossible to miss. "Yeah, I know," Jean replied quietly. After carefully observing Team 2's current condition from concealment, he drew a conclusion in a low voice. But Mesa Milcano isn't here. That absence stood out to him more than anything else. And not just that, Jean added, narrowing his eyes as he studied the scene. The number of ambushers has increased by 1. The situation had already shifted again, which meant the enemy was moving with more coordination than he had first expected. Jean slowly drew a small knife and spoke to Bubert Gaston in a measured, controlled voice. Bubert, close your eyes for a moment. After 3 seconds, strike the one on the left. Bubert obeyed at once, kneeling slightly as he drew his sword and steadied his breathing for the attack. Understood, Bubert answered. At the same time, Jean began using a technique Murakan had taught him, one tied to the unique properties of shadow energy. Anything wrapped in that power became sharper and far more destructive, as if the darkness itself compressed the material and pushed it beyond its normal limits. Then Jean burst forward and thrust the knife straight ahead without hesitation. The strike was clean, fierce, and direct, carrying a concentrated stream of power in a single straight line as it shot toward the target before the enemy could properly react. One of the two enemies was caught completely off guard by Jin's sudden direct attack. The blow came so fast and so decisively that there was no time left for defense, only the raw shock of realizing too late that the hunter had become the prey. The enemy was wiped out in a single instant, so fast and so cleanly that the surviving man from Team 2 could only stare in stunned disbelief. For a moment, he looked as if he could not even process what he had just seen with his own eyes. Right after that, Bubert Gaston sprang out from his hiding place and rushed the other enemy, who was still dazed and trying to understand what had happened. What the hell? The man started to shout, but then he suddenly glanced upward in alarm. Bubert Gaston's eyes were locked on him without the slightest hesitation. Bubert Gaston kept staring straight at him, sharp and unblinking, like a predator that had already decided its prey would not escape. That fierce look alone was enough to make the enemy freeze for the smallest but deadliest moment. At that exact instant, from behind the man, Jean Runcandle's Bradamante was already being drawn. The blade came free with a chilling flash just as the enemy was fully focused on dealing with Bubert Gaston's attack from the front. While the man was concentrating on blocking Bubert Gaston's blow, Jean charged in from directly behind and struck him across the back without mercy. Blood burst out in a violent spray, dark red and vivid, splashing across the cold ground and staining the snow in an ugly bloom. Jean forced the enemy down and pinned him firmly to the ground, leaving no room to struggle free. Then he lifted his head and turned to look at the others, his expression tense but controlled as he checked on the condition of Team 2. "Everyone, are you all right?" Jean asked. The survivors were covered in wounds, yet they still tried to hold themselves together so they would not worry him any more than necessary. One of them answered through pain, "Young master, we're fine." But they took Mesa Milcano. "We're sorry, young master." Jean replied at once, keeping his voice steady. "It's all right. Treat the wounded first. That comes before anything else." The enemy trapped beneath Jean looked up at him with eyes full of hatred, but there was fear there too, raw and desperate. Not wanting to die, he quickly threw away his pride and begged Jean to spare his life. Jean looked down at the man on the ground and answered in a cold, cutting voice, "You're asking me to spare you?" His eyes narrowed as he studied him. "From the look of you, you seem to be one of those pathetic followers of Zippel. I'll give you 2 choices." Jean lowered his sword and aimed its point straight at the man's throat. "One choice is this," Jean said, his tone icy and absolute. "You tell me your faction, your purpose, and where your base is, and then you die peacefully. The other is that you keep your mouth shut and die in agony, just like your comrades." The final word landed heavily, without pity or hesitation. Jean made it painfully clear that he was not bluffing, and the air around them seemed to turn even colder. From the look on the man's face, Jean could tell he still did not fully believe him. So Jean spoke clearly and without wavering. "I will keep my promise. My name is Jean Runcandle. I swear on my family's laws and honor." Hearing that, the man squeezed his eyes shut and finally broke. All right, he pleaded. "Please, spare my family. I belong to a revolutionary group called Canzello," the man said at last. Even as he confessed, Doubt and fear still lingered in his voice, as though he was terrified of both Jean and the organization he had just betrayed. Kinzello. Jean was visibly startled for a brief second, as if an old memory had suddenly resurfaced in his mind. Kinzello, that was the terrorist organization that had grown active around the time of his death in his previous life. Back then, the world had been thrown into chaos because of them. They had killed King Den and slaughtered countless innocent people, all while boldly calling themselves a revolutionary group, as if that title could somehow wash away their cruelty. But Jean knew the truth behind that name. What Kinzello really wanted was not liberation or justice. Their true goal was to place their own king on the throne of the entire world, no matter how much blood they had to spill to get there. A wave of anger rose in Jean. So your plan is to stir rebellion in the Xing kingdom by killing Jean Runcandle's soldiers? He demanded. The man hurriedly shook his head and stammered. I am just a pawn, so I don't know much. I don't know where the main base is either, but my branch is near the entrance to the Beastman's land. There are around 20 fighters there, and 4-star mages too. Listen carefully, the man added in panic, hoping to stay alive. Jin's gaze sharpened. One last question. Why did you capture Mesa Milcano? The apostle swallowed and answered. It was for propaganda, to promote our revolution. We received orders to capture a female soldier alive. The moment he heard that, Jin's face hardened with disgust and fury. You filthy bastards, he said through clenched teeth, his voice low and dangerous. The apostle flinched under that glare and hurried to add whatever he could. That's all I know, the man said desperately. Jean looked down at him with a chilling calm and replied, I will keep my promise. Then, without dragging it out, Jean brought down his sword and ended the man's life on the spot. Blood spread wide across the ground, dark and heavy against the pale snow. In the bitter cold, the sight felt even more brutal, leaving a grim silence hanging over the aftermath. Jean turned at once and asked, How long has it been since Mesa Milcano was taken? Buber Gaston answered, 1 hour. Hearing that, Jean quickly calculated the distance and muttered, Then they should still be near the entrance to the Beastman's land. Finish first aid, then send a request for reinforcements to the base. The others were clearly shaken by what he said next. I'm sorry, one of them said hesitantly. But are you planning to go alone, young master? The ambushers include 4-star fighters, and there are 20 of them in total. His disbelief was obvious, because to them, that sounded far too dangerous. He's right, another voice added immediately. Going alone is too dangerous. The fear in their protest was not cowardice. It was the reasonable fear of people who understood just how hopeless that kind of battle could become. Scott stepped forward and shouted, Young master, we are soldiers. It's normal for us to die in battle, so please. But before he could finish, Jean cut him off coldly. Scott, if a soldier has been captured and a son of Runcandle does nothing, then that is no better than shame. Jin's eyes turned even sharper as he continued. I am stronger than all of you think. So obey my orders. If anyone opposes me now, I will treat it as insubordination. There was no arrogance in his tone, only iron certainty that left no room for argument. And Buber Gaston, Jean added, turning directly to him. Since all of Team 2 is injured, you are now their strongest remaining soldier. That means you need to stay alert and hold everything together. Do you understand me? Buber Gaston lowered his head and answered firmly, I understand, young master. I'll remember that. After that, Jean left alone for the rebel base. As he moved through the storm, he could not stop picturing Mesa Milcano tied up somewhere in the darkness. Please, don't let me be too late. In the middle of the blizzard and the deep night, he pushed forward through the biting cold with that single thought burning in his mind. The enemy had around 24-star soldiers. Jean raised a hand and wiped the sweat from his cheek, even in the freezing weather, while thinking through the gap in strength. My swordsmanship is only around 3-star level. My magic is 4-star, and my shadow energy release is around 3-star as well. Even as those thoughts weighed on him, Jean kept moving deeper into the dark forest. The development of my second speed technique is going well, but in my current condition, I can't handle all of them at once. The priority is clear now. The top priority was rescuing Mesa Milcano. At that moment, Jean cast a wind spell, forming a green whirlwind in his hand. I need to avoid direct combat as much as possible and focus on finding Mesa first, he thought. Then he released the spell using a terrain scouting technique, sending the whirlwind outward into the night. The wind quickly spread in all directions like a wide sensing net, covering the surrounding terrain in a sweeping flow. It moved over the area with unnatural precision, searching every corner Jean could not see with his own eyes. Jean continued feeding magic into the wind spell and thought, if only I had even stronger wind magic here. The whirlwind twisted forward like a giant serpent, sliding through the darkness with eerie speed and purpose. It wound its way between the trees, rushing ahead through the forest without slowing down. Branches shook and snow scattered as the spell pressed deeper into the terrain in search of a clue. As Jean followed the motion of the whirlwind, he realized it was pulling toward an open meadow ahead. That shift in direction immediately caught his attention because it suggested movement or presence in that area. Without hesitating, he rushed that way at once. In his judgment, the enemy could not have gone far yet, and every second wasted now might cost Mesa Milcano her life. Jean was running fast through the snow when, without warning, an arrow shot in from the right side and flew straight toward him. The sudden attack cut through the night with frightening speed. More arrows followed from the same direction in rapid succession, but Jean reacted instantly. He cast wind magic into his hand and twisted aside, dodging with quick, controlled movements that barely left the arrows any chance to touch him. A moment later, the attackers revealed themselves. It was Mesa Milcano's captors group waiting in ambush, ready to cut him down before he could move any farther. They rushed at him while shouting to one another, "It's the Run Candle Brat. Get him!" By then, Jean had already completed his spell and drawn the sword at his waist. His posture lowered, and his whole presence shifted into that of someone fully ready to kill. He answered them with deadly sword strikes, each swing fast, precise, and filled with enough force to end a life in a single blow. The night air itself seemed to split around the path of his blade. One slash cut a man from the group cleanly in two. The horrifying sight made another enemy cry out in shock. Magic! That Run Candle bastard is using magic! But the shock did not last long. Their leader snapped back immediately and shouted, "Damn it! Stop panicking and kill him!" Without giving his opponents even a moment to recover, Jean drew his sword from its path again in one smooth motion. His attacks flowed one after another with no wasted movement, as if he had already decided exactly how this clash would unfold. The enemy leader's assault was quickly beaten back by Jean. Seeing his comrade pushed into danger, the man in the purple robe raised his staff, flame gathering at its tip, and shouted, "Get out of the way!" His voice rang sharply through the battlefield as the spell took shape. "Move, Muse!" the mage shouted again, forcing the swordsman to spin aside at once. There was urgency in that command, because the attack he was about to unleash did not care who stood in its way. Muse threw himself to the side just as the flames burst forward toward Jean, roaring through the air like something alive. The fire rushed at him as though it meant to swallow him whole in a single burning wave. But the moment the flames closed in, they transformed into binding chains and wrapped around Jin's arm, locking him in place. It was a trap hidden inside the attack, meant to immobilize him and create a perfect opening. Seeing that chance appear, Muse's face twisted into a triumphant smile. For that brief instant, he was certain the fight had already turned in their favor. That smile did not even have time to fully settle on his face before Jean struck. A single slash tore across Muse's body while he was still trying to understand what had gone wrong. At the same time, Jean dealt with the flames wrapped around his hand by twisting his wrist and grabbing hold of them directly, then pulling with fierce determination as if he meant to drag the magic itself under his control. The other mage had no time to properly react to what he was seeing. Before he could recover from the shock, he was yanked closer by Jin's forceful pull, his own spell turning against him in the chaos of the moment. Even then, the mage tried to resist with stubborn desperation. "It doesn't matter if fire doesn't work," he shouted, refusing to give up even as the fight was clearly slipping out of his hands. "Then I'll tear you apart with ice," the mage snarled. In the next instant, a magic circle bloomed into existence before him, and from it burst a rain of razor-sharp ice darts, each one aimed to pierce straight threw Jean Runcandle without mercy. But when the ice darts struck Jean Runcandle, they failed to leave even the slightest scratch on him. The attack that should have shredded flesh and drawn blood instead broke uselessly against him, as if his body had simply refused to accept the damage. Jean Runcandle swung his sword with effortless precision and shattered the incoming darts one after another. The ice burst apart in sparkling fragments, and the man watching could only stare in utter disbelief at how easily his attack had been destroyed. The enemy shouted in shock, "Impossible! How?" His voice cracked with panic and disbelief, but before he could make sense of what he was seeing, Jean Runcandle cut him down. As he fell, he left behind one last bitter, stunned sentence. "My magic," he muttered in disbelief. Then the battle finally came to an end. Jean Runcandle slowly exhaled and thought to himself with cold disgust, "Those damn Kinzello bastards." Even after winning, the bitterness of the encounter still clung to him. He gently sheathed his sword and continued thinking in silence. It didn't look like they had made any real effort to hide their tracks. If anything, they seemed far too careless. They were underestimating their opponents, and that arrogance might be the very weakness he could use against them. Jean Runcandle noticed footprints in the snow along with drag marks that looked like something heavy had been moved through the area. Looking over the scene, he reasoned that they must have met up with someone else here and then transferred their prisoner using a cart or wagon. Then Jean Runcandle thought it through further. Kinzello was not some random band of criminals. It was an organization with a strict hierarchy. If that was true, then they would likely divide their spoils according to rank and authority, not just seize things however they pleased. Holding the map in his hand, he turned and looked over the battlefield once more. If they really would not dare touch the reward reserved for someone of higher rank, then now was probably the only chance he had to rescue Mesa Milcano safely before she was moved deeper into enemy hands. As Jean Runcandle studied the map, he came to a quick conclusion. He was already near Beastmen territory, which meant the branch base they were using had to be somewhere close by. There was no time to waste with doubt now. If that was the case, then there was only one move to make. Jean Runcandle used a fire spell and burned the map in his hand. As the paper curled and blackened, he made up his mind. "I'll create a diversion, then use the confusion to find an opening and rescue Mesa." At that moment, the situation shifted. With a determined look in his eyes, Jean Runcandle released blazing flames from his hand. There was no hesitation in the way he cast the spell, only calm intent sharpened by urgency. The flames surged outward like a starving demon, wild and greedy, racing to swallow everything in their path. In the dark night, the fire spread so fiercely that it looked ready to devour an entire stretch of sky. To make the blaze spread even faster, Jean Runcandle added wind magic to feed the flames. The fire roared louder and climbed higher. "If I do this," he thought, "they'll have no choice but to rush out and try to put it out." From inside the growing blaze, a panicked voice suddenly shouted, "Fire!" What happened all of a sudden? The cry was sharp with confusion, and it was immediately followed by the noise of people stumbling around in alarm. Jean Runcandle hid himself behind a building and silently watched them descend into chaos. "Where did this fire come from?" someone shouted. "Put it out now. Water. Bring water." Their confusion spread almost as fast as the flames themselves. Then Jean Runcandle noticed one man shouting above the others. "Don't you idiots know how to put out a fire properly?" the man barked. He had a fierce face, a large build, and the kind of presence that naturally pushed others around. "Mages, use your water and ice spells." Jean narrowed his eyes. Is that their leader? Jean Runcandle kept watching the man and grew more certain that he was the one in charge. Taking full advantage of the panic and confusion around him, he began to move. Nearby, one of the subordinates shouted desperately, "Boss, the fire won't go out." The leader reacted sharply, immediately sensing something was off. "Do you think a fire like this would start on its own in weather like this?" he snapped. Someone definitely started it. Unlike the others, he was not letting panic dull his judgment. "Find him," the leader roared. But while he was issuing orders, he had no idea that the one responsible, Jean Runcandle himself, had already slipped in close enough to strike. At that moment, the leader suddenly sensed something wrong and whipped around with a shout. But it was already too late. A blue flash cut through the spot where he stood, cold and swift as death itself. The subordinates below, half blinded by smoke and firelight, did not realize what had just happened. Still caught in the chaos, they shouted at one another, "Move faster," completely unaware that the situation had already changed. "Call the mages now," they cried. Meanwhile, after bringing down the leader, Jean Runcandle skillfully took the key from him and held it tight in his hand. Good, he thought. I found the way in. The opening he needed had finally appeared. Jean Runcandle unlocked and opened the door. The air inside felt strangely cold against his skin, enough to make even him feel slightly unsettled. It's colder than I expected, he thought. Where could Mesa Milcano be? Then his eyes shifted toward one corner of the room, where he noticed a hatch set into the floor. It was easy to miss at a glance, but once he saw it, the answer felt obvious. A basement, and down in that basement, he caught sight of long hair spilling into view. That single detail was enough to make his heart tighten with urgency. Mesa Milcano, bound tightly, heard a familiar voice call out, "Mesa." She turned toward the sound at once, her eyes widening. "Young master." But instead of relief alone, worry rose in her voice as she hurriedly said, "Why are you here?" "It's dangerous here," Mesa Milcano warned him at once, putting his safety before her own. But Jean Runcandle did not let her concern distract him. In a calm, gentle voice, he asked only what mattered most. "Don't worry about me. Can you walk?" Jean Runcandle asked as he untied her. Mesa Milcano nodded weakly and answered, "Yes, but I don't think I can run." Hearing that, he replied without hesitation, "All right, then I'll help you up." His tone was steady, warm, and reassuring. Just then, the ground above them trembled violently, almost like an earthquake. Jean Runcandle, who had just helped Mesa Milcano to her feet, looked up in confusion. What was that? At the same time, something in Mesa's expression changed, as if she had already made a painful decision. "Young master," she said, looking directly into his eyes and speaking from the bottom of her heart. "Can you promise me one thing?" Jean Runcandle seemed to understand what she was about to say before she could finish, and he quickly covered her mouth. "Don't say it, Mesa," he said at once. But with a firm, determined look in her eyes, she still forced out every word she needed to say. "If we end up in real danger, just leave me behind. The young master is too important. Nothing bad can be allowed to happen to you." Of course, Jean Runcandle had no intention of abandoning his comrade. Supporting her carefully, he guided her toward the exit and said in a low, steady voice, "Let's get out first. This place is too dangerous." There was no room in him for the choice she was asking him to make. But when the two of them stepped outside, the area had already turned into a brutal battlefield. The people who had been there earlier were now lying motionless on the ground, taken down by someone else. Jean Runcandle stared at the scene in disbelief, then looked at the wound on one man's shoulder and immediately realized what kind of attack had caused it. This was the work of a beastman. More specifically, it was the work of a warrior from a combat-oriented beastman tribe. The sheer force and savage shape of the wound made that much unmistakably clear. Both Jean Runcandle and Mesa Milcano slowly turned their heads in the same direction, drawn by the heavy pressure in the air. Neither of them needed to speak to know something dangerous was standing there. There, lit by the raging red flames, was the shadow of a giant wolf-like figure. Its silhouette stood out against the fire with terrifying clarity, making the whole scene feel even more ominous. In one hand, the beastman gripped a hammer tightly. The weapon looked brutally heavy, and even at a glance, it was obvious that a single clean hit from it would be enough to crush bone without difficulty. He was a member of the White Wolf tribe, and his appearance was savage and overwhelmingly aggressive. A towering killing intent poured off him, so intense it felt like it was pressing down from the sky itself. Mesa Milcano immediately said, "Young master, I'll buy you some time, so hurry." But before she could finish, Jean Runcandle struck the back of her neck and knocked her unconscious. "Young master," she murmured before going limp. Then the man from the White Wolf tribe spoke in a voice full of contempt. "You useless bastards," he said coldly, looking at the dead and fallen men around him. "If you can't even put out a fire, then there's no reason for you to keep living." His words were cruel, dismissive, and completely devoid of mercy. Then he turned his gaze toward Jean Runcandle and asked, You're the one who caused all this, aren't you, kid? His tone made it clear that he already suspected the answer and was almost amused by it. Standing in front of that massive figure, Gene Runcandle showed no sign of fear or hesitation. He answered clearly and without wavering. That's right. I am a son of Runcandle, Gene Runcandle. Even faced with overwhelming hostility, his voice remained firm. Gene Runcandle met the other man's eyes with a determined stare and challenged him directly. There was no retreat in his posture, only a calm readiness to face whatever stood before him. State your name, Beastman, Gene Runcandle said. The White Wolf tribesman showed a gruesome smile, and his pale eyes gleamed strangely in the firelight. Runcandle. So you're one of the Runcandle children, he said, the words carrying both recognition and dangerous interest. A few days before the mission to the Xing Kingdom began, back at the Runcandle residence, a young man in a white robe had been standing alone. His eyes were shut, a sword was in his hand, and a terrifying black aura coiled around him. That young man was Gene Runcandle. The sword in Gene Runcandle's hand was being wrapped in a strange black aura, unnatural and ominous. It clung to the blade like living darkness, giving off a presence that felt both powerful and deeply dangerous. Then, all of a sudden, Murakin appeared behind him and kicked him hard. His eyes were wide with anger as he shouted, "You idiot!" The force of the blow was sharp enough to break Jin's concentration on the spot. Murakin was furious, practically blazing with rage as he yelled, "Do you have a death wish, or what?" Then he grabbed Gene Runcandle by the shirt and dragged him around. "I know I told you before," he snapped, "but you're still not good enough yet. If you try to release your sword now, all that'll happen is you'll get drunk on shadow energy." Still clutching Gene Runcandle by the collar, Murakin glared at him and growled, "If you don't want to die from a shadow energy overdose, then stop trying to awaken your sword." "Got it," Gene answered with a reluctant, almost nonchalant expression, but even then, he understood Murakin was not exaggerating. "Got it," Gene Runcandle said. Then the scene seemed to sharpen around him. He stood tall with his eyes narrowed, his fist clenched tight, silently repeating the name Runcandle to himself. "That's right. Today is the day I hunt the most valuable prey of all." The monster let out a thunderous roar that shook the air. "My name is Quajito Truca," he declared with savage pride. "I am a warrior of the Truca clan." His voice was huge, violent, and filled with the confidence of a beast born for battle. The White Wolf tribe was infamous for its bloodthirsty nature and love of combat. Even the weakest adult among them was said to be a 6-star warrior. Everyone knew that the White Wolf tribe hated the Runcandle family to the bone, and the reason was simple. Long ago, the first patriarch of Runcandle had lured out their god, the great White Wolf Havi, and killed him. Gene Runcandle weighed the situation in a single tense moment. "I can't escape from him while protecting Mesa Milcano," he thought. The answer was obvious, and it left him with no easy way out. Quajito Truca roared with fury, his killing intent flaring even higher. "I will offer you up to Havi," he bellowed, "so that his restless soul may finally find peace." The hatred in his voice was old, deep, and personal. Gene Runcandle stared back in silence, and Quajito Truca gave him a choice with cruel delight. "Choose," he said. "Face me in an honorable duel, or run like a coward and be torn to pieces while you flee." There was mockery in his tone, but there was also confidence that he could do exactly what he promised. Gene Runcandle raised his sword and answered without a trace of hesitation. "I'll fight you." His voice was calm and direct, but the resolve behind it was absolute. Quajito Truca's face lit up with savage excitement. "Good," he said with a grin. "So at least you're a Runcandle who still knows shame." To him, that answer made the fight worth enjoying. Then he lifted his weapon high and shouted, his blood clearly boiling with anticipation. Then, his stance widened, and the battlefield seemed to tighten around both of them. "Let's have a real fight." The clash exploded the moment those words ended. Sparks burst non-stop as steel met force, and the hilt of Gene Runcandle's golden sword flashed with a distinct, striking shape that stood out even in the chaos. A blinding flash of light burst between them. Gene Runcandle's eyes widened, as though something in that violent exchange had struck deeper than just his body. In that instant, the scene felt almost unreal, like a memory and a battle overlapping. The fight was brutally fierce from the very start. Every strike carried lethal weight, and neither side gave even a finger's width of ground without paying for it. It was the kind of battle that could kill with one mistake. Jean Runcandle thought grimly. He really is a member of the White Wolf tribe. I have to use everything I have just to block his attacks. Even defending against him was already taking all of Jin's focus and strength. The attacks of both fighters lit up the entire area. Sparks, steel, and flashes of force tore through the darkness, making the battlefield feel as though it were burning from the intensity of their clash alone. It was clearly a difficult fight for Jean Runcandle, but he did not lose heart. He thought again, I still have a chance to win. I have a few trump cards he knows nothing about. The pendant, magic, and shadow energy. Even so, he judged that using the pendant now was not worth the risk. A blue pendant rested in Jean Runcandle's palm for a brief moment. If I can't overcome this danger on my own, then I'm not qualified to become stronger, he told himself. That thought hardened his resolve more than any weapon could. As the battle raged on, it was as if an invisible circle separated Jean Runcandle and Quajito Truca from the rest of the world. Jean continued thinking through his options. Magic won't do. Against the White Wolf tribe, ordinary magic won't help enough to matter. Walls crumbled around them. But even in the middle of all that destruction, Jin's thoughts stayed painfully clear. And if someone from the clan is sent to investigate Kinzello, the guards will notice traces of magic right away. If that happens, my violation of the clan's taboo will be exposed. Even under the pressure of battle, that danger stayed firmly in his mind. So in the end, only one choice remained. Jean Runcandle reached that answer with grim certainty, knowing there was no safer path left for him to take. As he fought, one thought rang clearly through his mind. Shadow energy. At that same moment, Quajito Truca launched another crushing attack, forcing Jean to decide in the middle of motion. Release my sword, Jean Runcandle thought. Their clash stayed fierce and relentless, and even Quajito Truca gave him rough praise in the middle of it. Good sword, you Runcandle, he said, sounding genuinely impressed despite himself. But it still isn't equal to your clan's famous black sword, Quajito Truca continued. His words carried both mockery and respect, as if he was testing whether Jean truly deserved to carry the Runcandle name. And even Quajito Truca had to acknowledge what was standing in front of him. Still, he admitted, you're stronger than you look. The recognition was grudging, but it was real. Behind the smoke and noise of battle came the terrifying roar of Quajito Truca. It rolled across the field like thunder, heavy enough to shake the air and rattle the nerves of anyone who heard it. Remember the feeling from that night when you released your sword? Jean Runcandle told himself desperately. It's not over yet. That memory became the thin line he clung to while the fight threatened to overwhelm him. You Runcandle brat, Quajito Truca shouted, his pale blade rising with murderous force. His voice surged upward with the motion, turning the swing into something that felt more like an execution than an attack. Quajito Truca's terrifying face came into full view as he pressed forward. I will sacrifice you to Javi, he snarled again, his hatred burning brighter with every exchange. Jean Runcandle's gaze became frighteningly intense. I have to remember it now, he thought. Not later. Not after this. Right now? That single realization pushed everything else out of his mind. For the first time, panic flickered in Quajito Truca's eyes. It was only a brief change, but it was real. Something in Jean Runcandle's presence had shifted. Huh. Quajito Truca reacted in alarm as darkness suddenly swallowed the space around them. I can't see anything, he roared. Within that blackness, the shadow of a lone fighter moved silently, cutting through the unseen dark. A black aura wrapped itself around Jean Runcandle's sword as he spoke in a low, emotionless voice. I never understood why my clan was famous for its black sword. It's only recently that I finally began to understand. The darkness around the blade felt alive, deep, and unnatural. Quajito Truca was caught off guard. Jean Runcandle's slash tore across his body, and the sheer shock of the blow left him stunned where he stood. For the first time, the White Wolf warrior looked genuinely shaken. What are you? Quajito Truca demanded in disbelief. Jean Runcandle answered in a flat, emotionless tone. That was a good fight. Around them, The dark forest stood eerily still, as if even the trees had gone silent to watch the end. The two fought on until both were pushed toward exhaustion. Then Jean Runcandle's eyes changed, suddenly burning with fierce anger, as if something inside him had been dragged to the surface by force. Carrying his sword low, Jean Runcandle shot forward in a blur. His body moved fast and sharp, like an arrow released at the exact moment of certainty. Then, as if another image overlapped the battlefield, he saw himself kneeling on the ground, swallowed by a dark atmosphere and harsh words. "Useless thing," the voice said with cold contempt. "What can you do if you're this weak? What a fool. He doesn't even understand his own situation. You are a disgrace to the family. Even though we were born from the same mother, you are the greatest shame of all." The cruel words hit like blows, raw and humiliating. Murakin stepped toward Jean Runcandle, his figure cutting through the memory with fierce anger. "What did I tell you, you damn brat of darkness?" he shouted. "I told you that if you tried to release your sword with so little shadow energy, you'd pay for it, didn't I?" His scolding was brutal, but there was real alarm beneath it. Murakin's harsh voice pressed on. "Are you planning to collapse in the dirt after getting drunk on shadow energy? Get up. If you lose your mind here, then you're beyond saving." Every word struck hard, but it was the kind of cruelty meant to force Jean back to himself. Jean Runcandle slowly pushed himself up. Murakin kept driving him forward with those rough, cutting words. "Don't you already know what you need to do?" he snapped, refusing to let Jean sink into confusion. Jean Runcandle thought to himself, "Releasing shadow energy just restored my strength." Then another realization came. It's being swept away by the shadow energy around me. The problem was not the power itself, but how unstable it became once it spread outward. So I'm not releasing the shadow energy properly, Jean realized. I can't let it get scattered again. I have to try one more time. His breathing was rough, but his mind was beginning to settle around that single point. Jean Runcandle kept telling himself to calm down, again and again. He repeated it inwardly like a command, forcing his panic, pain, and noise-filled thoughts back under control. He placed a hand on his chest, breathing heavily, his whole body drenched in sweat. "Did I make it through?" he asked himself. The question came from genuine uncertainty, because what he felt now was not simple relief. The pain was gone, but that only made him more uneasy. "My body doesn't feel different, yet it feels like I'm overflowing with shadow energy," he thought. The absence of pain did not reassure him. It warned him. Jean Runcandle forced himself back to his feet. "It doesn't seem to affect my movements, so I have to get Mesa Milcano back first." Whatever was happening inside him, he pushed it aside for now and fixed his mind on the person he had to save. Then suddenly, a strange sound broke the silence. Jean Runcandle's eyes sharpened at once. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the darkness like a blade. A frightened figure stumbled out with a pale face and trembling lips. Please don't," he stammered. Please don't kill me." Fear had completely drained the strength from his voice. Jean Runcandle looked at him calmly and asked, "So, you're with Kinzello? Then there are still a few survivors left, huh?" The man hurriedly shook his head and denied it in a panic. "No, I'm not," he blurted out at once. The blonde-haired man, terrified out of his mind, raised both hands high over his head and babbled out his explanation. "I'm Simberville, of the Ville family in the Xing Kingdom." His words came out fast and desperate, as if saying his name clearly might be the only thing that could save his life.